In this video, we're going to show you how to replace the engine oil cooler lines on your Toyota Highlander, located under the engine splash shield. Remove the engine oil cap. Put that off to the side. I like to put it on the hood latch, so you will never be able to shut the hood until the engine oil is filled. And I like to also pull the dipstick to help the oil drain faster. We're going to remove the engine splash shield. There's 14 10mm bolts and 3 clips. Remove the clips. Go around and remove our 10mm bolts. Using a 14mm socket, undo the drain plug on the oil pan. Remove the crush washer off of the drain plug. Go ahead and toss this away. We're going to use a new crush washer before we install the drain plug back into the oil pan. We're going to be going after these 2 bolts. Using a 12mm socket, remove the 12mm bolt. Using a deep socket, we're going to remove the 12mm nut. And to make the line easy to remove, we're going to use an E8 and remove this stud. Remove the stud out of its place. Now we're going to move over to the left and go after the 12mm bolt that's located in between the 2 lines. Remove the bolt. We're going to be taking off this nut and then that stud. It's a 12mm nut and a E8 socket. I'm using a deep 12mm socket, a swivel connector, and 2 extensions to try and reach this nut. And remove the 12mm nut from that back stud. We're going to remove that stud that's in the frame using an E8. I have it on a swivel with an extension. We're going to remove that stud now. Remove the stud. There's 3 12mm nuts on each of these connections. There's also 3 E8 studs in each of the holes. Remove all the nuts and remove all the studs, and then do the same thing on the other side. Using a small pick tool, we're going to release the clip holding this harness onto the side. Push this little tab up. After that clip is unlocked, you can push this harness forward and remove it off of the bracket. This will give you access to a 12mm nut that is behind it that is unable to be got if this harness is on that bracket. This nut right here. We'll be removing this 12mm nut and pushing that harness up and out of the way so I can fit my 12mm socket in there to get this nut off. My stud came off with the nut. Using a 12mm wrench, we're going to remove the last nut off of the oil cooler line. And again with this one, the stud is coming out with the nut. When the line set comes down, it will leak oil. Make sure you have a drip pan and some absorbent mats to catch all the oil. These lines will be full. Once the line set is unhooked, go ahead and remove it from the car. If the nut took the stud out, we're going to remove the nut off of the stud before reinstalling. I'm going to use a 12mm wrench and hold the nut. And I'm going to twist it down farther onto the stud. And once I do that, I'm going to take these bolts and I'm going to go to a wire wheel and I'm going to clean up all the rust around it, and then I'm going to remove the nut off of the stud. Once I have the bolts cleaned up, I'm going to remove the nut off of the stud. I like taking all the rust off before removing it off of the stud, just so it makes it much easier to do it. So now I'm able to turn it off by hand instead of fighting the rust. Using a razor blade, I'm going to go around and clean up this mating surface. I'm going to be very careful not to scratch the mating surface at all. You don't want to mar it and make it so it can't seal. And go around and do that to both sides. Before putting the line set in, I'm going to install one gasket onto the line, and I'm going to put one stud through to try and help hold it there. I'm going to put the lines in place while trying to keep the gasket on. And start this stud by hand. Installed that top stud. I'm going to put my gasket up over that. It'll kind of hold it in place for me. And then I can slip the line over it and start the 12mm bolt that's next to it. Install the 12mm bolt. And this will hold the gasket in place so it doesn't fall out or slip and go somewhere we don't want it to. I'm going to install the bottom stud now. Using an E8 bit on a 1-inch quarter extension, we're going to start this stud by hand, putting pressure with one hand under this subframe, pushing on the end of the extension and twisting it with our fingers. Once it's in, we'll start twisting it down with a ratchet. Install the nut finger tight on that stud. Be very patient while you're doing this. It is very tight and it's not easy. We're going to start it, but we do not want to totally snug it down, because we want this tube on the left side to be able to wiggle so we can put our gasket in and then install the studs on that side. Reaching up through the bottom, we're going to install the gasket. We're going to pull slightly up on the pipe to give it room. And we're going to start one stud. Once you have the stud started by hand, go ahead and swap to a ratchet and tighten it down. Okay, that's started. If you're really struggling to get these studs in, it's not a bad idea to undo this harness. Reach onto the back of here, and there's two clips on either side. Pinch those in and pull the clip out. These are the two clips. I'm just pinching here and pulling out. This next one, they're on the other side. They're on the top and bottom, so we'll pinch one on the top, pull it out, and then pinch one on the bottom. And that will release the clip. The next thing, you can take the connector off of the AC compressor. There's a little tab on top. Push that down and pull straight out. And that will release that connector. That's the tab on top. The last thing, pinching your fingers like this on this bracket on the back of that clip will allow it to release. If you're struggling, you can use a trim tool and pull it out. Like so. And then that just opens up this space and allows your wrist a lot more room to work. With our stud installed by hand, we can then use a ratchet and tighten it down. You want to be very careful not to cross thread these. It's a steel bolt going into aluminum. Then I'm going to tighten the 12mm bolt in the middle. And then we're going to start installing the right stud by hand. And once we feel it started, then we can go on it with a ratchet. With the stud installed by hand, you can then move to a ratchet and snug it down. Now, I know I've already said it, but be very patient while doing this job. It's a very tight space. With all the studs and bolts installed, go ahead and go around. Start installing all of the nuts. With everything snugged down, go around and torque it to 15 foot-pounds. I'm going to start with the middle on both sides. Do the same thing on the other side. Torque the nuts and the bolt to 15 foot-pounds. Starting with the bolt in the middle. Torque everything to 15 foot-pounds. And then do the same thing on the bottom. Torque it to 15 foot-pounds. If you took this harness off for just a little bit of extra room. We're going to install that back now. We're going to install the harness back onto the AC bracket. Go ahead and give it a push on. This little clip up here, make sure that clips in. If you took the connector off, go ahead and reconnect that now. Push in and you'll hear a click. This bottom gray harness, put the 2 plastic clips back into the bracket on the subframe. And reinstall the connector. Push until you hear a click. Install the new crush washer onto the drain plug, and then this is ready to go back into the oil pan. Once the oil is done draining, go ahead and install your drain plug. Torque the drain plug to 30 foot-pounds. I'm going to clean the area and get all the old oil off. Install the engine splash shield. Screw in your bolts. These screw thread ones go up front. And the fine bolt thread ones go in middle. It's a good idea to put anti-seize on these so they're easy to come out every time. This is a cover that comes off often. We're going to use 6.4 quarts of 020 oil and refill our engine. A little tip is to pour the bottle from the side. You won't get the glugging, and it'll be much easier not to miss. With 6 quarts in there, we're going to add another 0.4. If you do what I just did and got a little bit of oil under the engine cover, lift the engine cover straight up, and then grab a rag and clean around where you just spilled. You can use a little bit of brake parts cleaner to help you clean it up. Put the engine oil cap on. You can do a little pre-check with your dipstick. Stick it in. If it's been out since you started the oil change, you most likely won't need to wipe it before you do a check. I just like to make sure that the oil is on the dipstick. And then we'll go into the car, start the engine, let it run for a few seconds, shut it off, and then check our oil again in about 2-3 minutes once it drains back down into the pan. The oil's in the correct spot when it's at this top line. This is full, this is low, and in between those marks is 1 full quart.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.